Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Data Playbook. So, we got through all of the Sunday games, the 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock ones. Those have been reviewed and are in another video if you want to check those out. But this video is going to look into the Sunday night game with New England at Buffalo. So, let's take a closer look. So, looking at the Pats-Bills game, you have the Bills pretty heavily favored on the money line with a spread of 8.5 and a total line of 49.5 total points. Going through the team rankings, you have the Patriots with a passing rank of 4, a rushing rank of 17, an allowed passing rank of 28, and an allowed rushing rank of 3. So the Patriots can stop the running game pretty well, but can't seem to stop the pass. They also seem to be able to pass it pretty well, but are pretty average in rushing. Meanwhile, Buffalo has a passing rank of 3 and a rushing rank of 1, so they're top tier offensively. They have an allowed passing rank of 4 and an allowed rushing rank of 31. So they're really good at stopping the pass, but not so good at stopping the run. They're one of the worst teams at stopping the run. Going through our averages, you get the Patriots that have an average of 247 passing yards per game and a little over 101 rushing yards per game. Buffalo has 249 passing yards per game on average and gets 163.5 rushing yards per game. New England has an average of half a passing interception a game, meaning they've had 2 interceptions this season, and they suffer 3.25 sacks on average per game, while Buffalo has thrown 1 interception all season and suffers about 1.75 sacks per game. Defensively, you have the Patriots allowing 256 passing yards per game on average, and only allowing 77.5 rushing yards per game, while Buffalo is a bit of the opposite, allowing only 141 passing yards per game, but allowing more than 164 rushing yards per game. Defensively, you have the Patriots and the Bills fairly close, with the Patriots getting 5.25 QB hits per game, and the Bills averaging 4 QB hits per game. Bills have a couple interceptions that they've gathered throughout the season, and the Patriots defense has had 3 interceptions this season. Looking into our quarterbacks, you have Drake May for the Patriots and Josh Allen for the Bills. Drake May has had 83.5 fantasy points this season. He actually has an extra PPR point from a reception. So you have Drake May with 83.5 fantasy points. He actually has an extra fantasy point for PPR because he caught a pass. Which changes this a little bit, but typically you don't hear that from the quarterbacks because they don't catch passes, so they just have the same for PPR versus regular, but Drake May's a little bit of an exception here. That does come out to be an average of almost 21 fantasy points per game. It is if you're in a PPR league. Josh Allen, though, has had 98.5 fantasy points this season, averaging 24.6 per game. Drake May has had 2 passing interceptions and lost 1 fumble to a sack, and he's suffered 13 sacks this season. Josh Allen has had 1 passing interception and suffered 7 sacks this season and had no other fumbles. Going through their averages, you have Drake May with 247 average passing yards per game, and you have Josh Allen with an average of 241 passing yards per game. Drake May also gets almost 25 rushing yards per game, while Josh Allen gets nearly 40 rushing yards per game. Week by week, you just have the biggest week for Josh Allen in week 1 with 394 passing yards, and his worst week in week 2 with 148. But since then, he's managed to stay over 200 passing yards per game. While Drake May, a little bit more consistent, has never dropped below 200 passing yards per game. Last week was his worst with 203, and his best week 1 with 287 passing yards. But he still has a 230 and a 268, so he's well above 200 passing yards every single game, except for last game, where he just broke 200. And then looking into the running backs, you have Ramondre Stevenson for the Patriots and James Cook for the Bills. Stevenson has had 24.6 fantasy points, 35.6 in PPR, averaging 6.1 and 8.9 in PPR. James Cook has 79 fantasy points, 91 in PPR, averaging 19.7 fantasy points, or 22.75 in PPR. James Cook has never lost a turnover here, even though he had 1 fumble, did not lose it, while Stevenson has had 2 fumbles and lost both of them. Looking at the breakdown a little bit more, you get an average of 31 rushing yards for Stevenson and an average of 35 receiving yards per game for Stevenson. While James Cook breaks 100 rushing yards per game on average and gets 22 receiving yards per game. Stevenson's best week was week 2 with 54 rushing yards, and his worst week was week 1 with 15. He also had a bad week in week 3 with only 18, and last week only had 38. Where James Cook, his worst week was week 1 with 44 rushing yards, but he had 132 as his highest in the next week after that in week 2, and he even had 117 last week, 108 in the week before that. So he's broken 100 rushing yards 3 out of 4 games. Just to point out, too, James Cook actually made up for the the weaker rushing in week 1 with 58 receiving yards in week 1, which is his high for receiving yards. And once again, looking at our primary receivers, our number 1 wide receivers, I hope to actually have a panel that will show all 3 of them and their matchups defensively and how they've been doing compared to each other on the team. So look forward to that. Hopefully that comes in place in the next week or so. But for now, we'll just continue with the number 1 wide receivers, which are Stephon Diggs for the Patriots and Keon Coleman for the Bills. So looking at Diggs, he has 21.3 fantasy points, 40.3 in PPR. That's an average of 5.3 fantasy points, or 10 in PPR formats. Keon Coleman has 26.3 fantasy points, 43.3 in PPR. That's an average of 6.58, or 10.8 in PPR. Looking at their turnovers, neither guy has given up a turnover. Going through their detailed stats, you have Stephon Diggs averaging 53.2 receiving yards per game, and you have Coleman just short of 51 receiving yards per game. And if we break that down, you have Diggs with his worst week in week 3 with 23 receiving yards, his best week last week with 101 receiving yards, and otherwise muddling around in that 30 to 40 receiving yard range. He does get quite a few receptions, though, off of his targets, missing typically only 1 or 2, just 1 out of the targets of the receptions that he's targeted on. Over here with Coleman, you have his best week with 112 in week 1. And then other than that, he's been averaging low 30s, 40s, 20s here, 26, 20, 45. So he has been a little inconsistent and much lower since that first week. If we look at that, though, compared to the team, you have Diggs getting 22.2% of the receiving share on the team. And it looks like Kayshawn is the one who actually gets the largest share from the Patriots, followed actually by Hunter Henry and then Diggs. Over here with Coleman, he gets the largest share of receiving yards, closely followed behind with Palmer, I believe, but he is the number 1 receiver for sure. And then finally, looking into our tight ends, you have Hunter Henry for the Patriots and Dalton Kincaid for the Bills. Hunter Henry has had 38.4 fantasy points, 53.4 in PPR. That's an average of just short of 10, 9.6 average fantasy points, and 13.3 in PPR formats. For Kincaid, he has 35.9 fantasy points, 49.9 in PPR. That's an average of almost 9 fantasy points per game, or 12.5 in PPR. Neither player has given up any turnovers. And looking at their averages for this season, you have Hunter Henry averaging 51 receiving yards per game, while Kincaid averages 44, just short of 45 receiving yards per game. Week by week, you have Hunter Henry with his best week in week 3 with 90 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. You have his worst week in week 2 with only 9 receiving yards, and otherwise he's been kind of inconsistent between that. 39, 66, 9, 90, so that's quite a range. He does have the second largest share of receiving on the team, as we saw before with Diggs being that red part of the pie. With Kincaid, he's a little bit more consistent, with his worst week getting 28 receiving yards, but still getting a touchdown, and his best week getting 66 receiving yards with a touchdown. There's only 1 week where he hasn't had a touchdown, and that equates to about 16.5, a little bit more percentage of his share of everybody else on the team. So that's all I have for Sunday Night Football. I hope that was enlightening or helpful. I hope that you can use that information, and if so, then leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. And then don't forget to comment on anything else that could be helpful. If you think there's more information that needs to be included, or if I need to cover more things, just let me know. But otherwise, I will see you all in the next video.